Thanks for joining me. In this chapter, I'm going to be discussing my time-lapse workflow. We're going to be going inside of DaVinci Resolve, and I'm going to show you a step-by-step process from beginning, middle to end, and we're going to create a beautiful cinematic time-lapse. If you don't have DaVinci Resolve, you can easily go download it. There's a free 4K version that gives you pretty much everything you need tool-wise for what we're going to be doing in this part of the processing. The studio version gives you a ton of must-haves when it comes to deflickering, image control, as well as using GPU processing, which is really helpful and beneficial if you have a slow computer or if you have a fast computer and you actually want to unlock all of that powerful hardware so that you can use it in the post-production. The next thing you'll need is the Adobe DNG converter, but this is really only necessary if you're using Sony or Fuji because DaVinci Resolve doesn't natively look at the Sony AWR files or the Fuji RAW files, so you'll have to convert them to Cinema DMG, but it's not that hard. It takes just a few seconds in most cases, and then you'll be good to go. If you are using Canon or Nikon, you can really just skip this step and go straight to the processing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our digital negative converter, and this is by Adobe again. And what we want to do is we want to navigate to wherever we had our time-lapse saved. And I will say, if you are looking to create a structure for your workflow, make sure you do it in a way that it's easily readable and searchable. So if you are looking to manage all of your files, put a scene, the scene number, the date, and a description of what the file is. So, if you're out in the wilderness of Wyoming, you can say Wyoming time-lapse, put the date on it, and then underneath that, you can throw all of the time lapses that might be in that sequence, and then you can go from there. So I'm going to open up and select my folder, and I've already taken it there, so I've got that, and then I'm going to hit select. And this is basically just telling the computer where it's going to find all of those images that they need to convert. The next is where we need to save our converted images to, and I highly recommend just saving them in the same folder. We just want to create a new folder called DNG. That way we have both the original Sony RAW files, and then we have also the converted DNG files. You can go back and delete the DNG files later, or even delete the RAW files, because both are perfectly acceptable RAW files, and you also don't want to take up too much space, because the DNG converted files will also take up a similar amount of space that the regular Sony RAWs take up. So after we've selected our folder and created our new folder, which I've just made here, which is called DNG, I'm going to select that. So next we're going to come down and tell the computer what to name each of these files. I'm just going to put what the title is, which is Timelapse 21, and then I put an underscore here. And then I also make sure that we do a 4 or 5 sequence number because you want to be able to have all of those files be read and done in a sequential order. So I'm going to have my beginning number be 0. I'm going to leave my file extension as DNG. And if we look up here what the naming convention has it has Timelapse 21, and then it's going to start off with 00000, and then basically compile all of those images together from 0 to 700, which is what we shot originally. You don't have to worry about any of the preferences down here. Just make sure that you're using Camera Raw 14 or later. By the time you read this, there might be a version 15 and above, but just make sure that you're using the highest level compatibility. And then all you have to do is hit convert. And then once you hit convert, it's going to take just a few seconds or a few minutes, just depending on how fast your computer is. And then you'll have a DNG folder all ready to rock and roll, so we can bring it into DaVinci Resolve and start editing that beautiful raw time-lapse photography. So I'm going to close this out, and then we're going to open up DaVinci Resolve. Now, if you're a first-time user to DaVinci Resolve, it can be a little daunting because there's so many different buttons and so many actions that you can take, but really DaVinci Resolve is very easy to use, and it's super user-friendly. The first thing we're going to do is, after you've created your new project, is we're going to go over to our Media tab. And then what you're going to do is you're going to find where your time-lapse is saved at, and then what we're going to do is we're going to import that sequence. Now, if we click on the main folder, which is Timelapse 21, this is where all of our Sony RAW files are, and nothing's showing up because those files, obviously they're not supported in this program. But if we double click on the DNG file, I'll see that if I scroll over here, I have a perfectly ready to rock and roll video sequence, and all I have to do is drag and bring it down to my main master bin. And there we go. We're ready to start editing our time-lapse. I'm going to bring up the Edit tab here. And the Edit tab is where we're going to be doing all of our work with our time-lapse. And that's going to basically allow us to scrub through the time-lapse, do playback on it, and make sure that it's looking the way that we want it to look. The next tab that we have is our Color tab. And that's going to be our second most beneficial tab, because that's where we're going to be doing all of our stylization. We're going to be doing our color grading, and we're going to be basically compiling the shot as we want to see it in this tab. And it's really great because there's so much you can do inside of DaVinci Resolve. So the next thing we want to do is we want to import that footage into our timeline. And since we've already put it into our bin, all I have to do is click and then drag it down right to our timeline. Now, on the right-hand side here, if you don't have your inspector tab open, you may just have a screen that looks like this. So all we have to do is come to the top right-hand corner. We'll click inspector. And this is going to allow us to open up our video transform area. We can also check out our file info so that we can see that it's a cinema DNG here, and we see that it has a resolution of a little bit over 8K and a frame rate of 24p. So we'll come back over to video, and what we want to do is, if we're looking on the timeline here, and if I scrub through this, you'll see that we have some vertical black bars on the left and the right hand side, and we really want to get rid of those because they're not part of the image. So I'm going to zoom in, and basically we want to take it to about 1.2. And that's going to give you the perfect setting. And that way we've just conformed it so that it's in this 16:9 ratio. And now if we do a playback, we can see our time lapse playing. And there we go. Now, we're taking a look at our time lapse now, and because I've converted it into a DNG, what's going to happen is it's going to bring it in as a log file. And if you're a Sony user, what you have to do is you have to convert the log file, whether that's S-Log3 or S-Log2, depending on what camera you're using, and then we have to put a Rec 709 LUT on top of that. So next, what we want to do is we want to go down to our color tab. And this is going to open up our color window. And there's a lot of fun, interesting things here. If you are using the free version, you may not have access to all of these, but you will have access to most of these. But what we're going to be doing for the most part, you'll have full access to. So just coming through the breakdown over here, we've got on the top part here, we've got a gallery, LUTs, and media pool. So the first tab we're going to look at is the LUTs tab. And the LUTs tab is going to allow us to pick a LUT that we can apply strictly for our Sony cameras. And what I have over here is S-Log3 Gamut 3 to Rec 709 Type A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and drag and drop this right onto our timeline. And we can see that the image drastically changes almost instantly. And we get more contrast, but it's a lot darker. And it almost looks like the time lapse is ruined, but I promise you it's not. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go over to our RAW tab. And if we come down here in the timeline, we can see that the RAW tab is on the very far left-hand side of our editing windows. And then I'm going to go from decode using, I'm going to select project and then go down to clip. And this is going to unlock all of our raw settings. Now you might think, oh, this is great. This is kind of like Lightroom. We can come in here, we can adjust all of these settings from this point, and it'll be great. But what I will say is you don't really want to use or edit from the Cinema DNG or the raw settings, because what we want to do is we want to leave that for our primary wheels. That's where all of the work is actually going to take place in. What I will say is you can use the raw settings over here in case you do want to boost something, change the color temperature more accurately, if you do want to reduce the highlights a little bit in your scene. But the main thing that we want to have here is be able to do highlight recovery. And the highlight recovery is incredibly important because we want to be able to retain all of the information in our highlights while also getting all of our information from the midtones and the shadows. If we leave this unchecked, what's going to happen is our image may be blown out in certain places and it's not going to look correct. But if we click highlight recovery and then we adjust our highlights from there, we'll have the ability to retain that information and it'll look absolutely beautiful. So if you can see here, I can adjust my highlights and we are getting some more definition up in this top right hand corner of our frame. But I'm going to leave it to right where it was at 0. And then we're going to go back to our primary wheels. And the primary wheels are great because this is where we control all of our color and all of the stylization in our shot. On the right-hand side of our screen here, you can see that I have a parade, and I highly recommend opening your parade because this is how we're going to tell where we need to adjust and modify our image. If we're looking strictly at this, we can see that there's really no middle ground here within our color space or in our channels, and we really want to put more information on there. So the first thing I normally do is I'll go through and I'll go from gain to lift to gamma, then I'll adjust shadows and highlights. For this particular scene, since the majority of everything we're doing is shadows, we're going to increase those first. So I'm going to increase the shadows. And we can already see, if I bring it all the way to 100%, we can see that the image has already taken shape. But what we are noticing too is it's creating kind of a flat, muddied image, and we don't want that. So don't go 100% on your shadows. We're going to bring shadows down to about 45%. And then what we're going to do from here is add gain. And what gain does, gain controls the highlights in your scenes, but it also controls what would be the brightness in your scene as well. So we can increase this quite a bit. And then what I'll do is also drop down my highlights a little bit. That way we're retaining more of the information inside the clouds. And then if I scrub through and play this back, we can see, wow, that's a lot that's happening right there. And if I'm looking at my parade here, I can see that on the top corners here, we are peaking out. And that's obviously where the highlights are hitting the clouds right here. So we're going to bring that gain down a little bit so we can have a little more information on there. And you can see we're taking more shape. We're getting all of our information back. in these clouds. And yeah, so the image here looks okay. It doesn't look great, so we want to make it look better. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to split this scene up into two. Much like here in Lightroom, we're going to add a gradient on the bottom level and basically just focus on that for right now, and then we'll take care of the top, and then we'll be done. So what I'll do here is I'll right-click, I'll do Add Node, and then click Corrector. And every time that you're starting or wanting to do something new, you should create a new node. So this way there's a new action and you're not muddying up all of your other nodes. And this is great if you want to go back and change something, or you just want to adjust a principal property in the shot. So I'm going to come here, I'll drop this node, and this node is going to be strictly for the bottom part of our time lapse. And then what I'll do is I'll come over to my power window right here, and then I'll click on the square box. And then if we look on the screen here, and what we've just done is created a mask in our shot. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and then I'm going to position our mask so that it's basically right on top of the portion that we want to have altered and brightened. And then what we'll do is I'll also open up this so it creates more of a gradient here. And you'll just see as we begin to increase the gain and then also work on gamma and maybe even add some shadow to that, that it's really going to transform the scene quite a bit. So I'm going to add that, and I can bring my gain up quite a bit here. And you can see we're getting much more information in our parade here. Whereas we were at around 256 nits, now we have more information in that middle range between 512 and 768. What I am noticing though is that it looks a little dull. So I'm also going to add a little bit of saturation to that to give it a little more color, and I'll probably bring that up to about 75. And that looks great. We're not clipping too much here, but what I will notice is that I need to bring my lift down. And what lift is going to do is it's going to balance my image out. If you watch on the right-hand side, as I move this, you can see the parade move up and down. And what we really want to do is we want to make sure that those bottom colors are touching just at 0, and that's going to give us a much more balanced image. Now, from here, what we can do is we can go back to our main node, and if we play this back here, we can see that we're getting some of our detail that we want back. I mean, we're definitely getting much better color here. We're getting a nice combination between that foreground and that background, and it's creating a very balanced image. But what's happening over here, though, is we still are pretty dark. And what I'm going to do is click back on my second layer, and then I'm just going to increase the shadows just enough so that we can see some of the detail in there. And this would be more realistic of what your eye would see when you're out shooting, because it is creating a much more balanced image. It's not just dark. But we also want to retain all that information as far as those midtones and shadows go. So I'm going to increase the contrast just a little bit to give it a little more punchiness. And then if I come back to the main and we play it a little bit, I'm going to scrub through that. My favorite part is when the light hits. And when the light hits, it just looks absolutely beautiful. And if I was using this for a production, this would be probably the time that I would want to showcase in the time lapse. And I would come and do, you know, going from darkness to light and then back to darkness on the other side. And it's just a really beautiful light sweep. And then from here, there's a couple different things that we can do. Since there is a little bit of flicker in the shot, and it's not necessarily caused by the camera, it's caused by the change in the exposure in the sky, I can add what's called a deflicker. And what I'll do is I'll create another node, and I'll add that to the next line up. And then all I have to do over here is go over to my effects library. If your effects library is closed, you just hit the top right-hand corner, and you'll be given a plethora of different things to choose from. And depending if you're on the studio version or the free version, you may only have a few things in here, but I am using the studio version and have access to everything, and I recommend you buy it as well. So I'm going to type in deflicker, and it's going to pop up with the deflicker, and then all I have to do is pop this on. And what that's going to do is basically it's just going to blend any kind of lighting change in our scene so that it smooths it out. And instead of being very stark and direct when it hits, it's going to create a very nice ramp to that. And it's going to look so much more professional, and it's really going to make sure that the viewer's eyes aren't jarred when they're looking at it. So if I go through and do this, we can play it back. I will say with the deflicker on, you probably will see a very large reduction in performance in your computer, depending on what you're using, because it does use a ton of processing power. So what I'm going to do in the main shot too, because I can still see that our parade isn't necessarily touching where we need to, is I can do the offset. And the offset is just going to shift everything down a little bit, and then I bring the lift down. And there we go. We're creating a much more balanced image. And if you go off of the parade from the red, green, and blue channels, we'll easily be able to create a much more balanced image this way. And if I scrub through and look at my shot again, it's just really beautiful as it's coming into the scene here. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for the most part when it comes to doing a basic color correction on our timeline. Now, if you are used to using Lightroom and you like going in there and being able to do everything individually, you still have that ability to do that. In the second chapter of post-production, I'm going to show you how to use keyframes. So if you want to change the exposure, or you want to ramp the exposure or ramp the white balance, you can literally do anything that you can do in Lightroom and more. And when it comes to day to night editing, this is probably the easiest way to do it. Much easier than LR Timelapse and much easier than using just standard Lightroom. So now that we have our basic colors down and we have everything situated, what we'll do is we want to add a little bit of a zoom to this because the image kind of falls flat because there's not a lot of motion in this. And as I said in the other previous chapters, we really want to make sure that there's at least 3 elements of motion in your shot, or 3 elements of time lapse, whether that is changing of light, changing of shadows, anything that might just add interest to that. We just want to make sure that there's a multitude of things just so we can make it more interesting. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a simple zoom in, and all you have to do here is we're going to come to the very start of our frame. And on the right-hand side here, there's a little diamond, and that's called a keyframe. And the keyframe is going to tell the computer that this is where I want the initial zoom to start, and then we'll go to the very end, and that's where the final zoom will be. So we've started at our zoom at 1.2, and then what I'm going to do is come to the very end here. I'm going to add another keyframe first, and then I'm going to change this to 1.5. And you can see that we've just zoomed in on our shot. And if I come all the way back here and I play it, we can see we're getting a nice, subtle, gentle zoom in. And that zoom in is going to just create a nice little cinematic push. And that cinematic push is really what's going to change and elevate the shot from being, just a simple time lapse to being something a little bit more. And it looks absolutely beautiful. So once you're done with this, all we have to do is export our footage, and depending on what kind of vehicle you want to use, whether this is going to be for web-based use or you want to use it as a master, there's a bunch of different codec options that we can choose, and we'll go through that next. So what we want to do is click on Deliver, and this is going to open up our Export tab. And what I would recommend if you are doing just web export is using just a simple QuickTime format at H.264. And then you can choose a resolution that you want, and depending if you're using the studio version or the free version, you can go anywhere from 4K to 8K to 12K to 16K, but that's only in the full version. If you are using the free version, you can only go up to 4K, but still, it's absolutely wonderful. We're going to choose 4K on this because we're living in 2023 now. We want to make sure that we have the best resolution possible. And then once you're done with that, you would come up to File Name, you change your file name, and we'll call this Timelapse 21. And then I'll choose a location of where to save it to. And I'm just going to save it directly to my desktop in this instance. And what I would recommend is what you should be doing is compiling a folder that has all of your time lapses together. That way, if you want to shoot for stock or you want to be able to sell it to clients, you know exactly where your shots are, and then you can easily distribute them to whomever wants them. Now, if you want to master your shot, I definitely recommend not using H.264. If you are on an Apple computer, you can use Apple ProRes, any flavor, 422HQ, 444. Anything that you really want, but ProRes is probably the best thing to actually encapsulate your footage in because it's a non-long op format and it's really easy to edit. The next thing that you can do is, if you are on a Windows machine, is using the DNxHR, which I really like. It's a very high bit rate, and it retains up to 12 bits of information, and it really, when it comes to the editing phase and then mastering, it's just a very beautiful file. But again, they're very large, and this would go for both the ProRes 444 or the 442HQ. But at the end of the day, if you're mastering your shots, you want to have the best possible quality, and that's what's going to give you that ability to do that. We're going to go back, though, and change this to H.264. And then I also choose encoding to be NVIDIA. If you are on a Windows machine and you're using NVIDIA, you have that bonus option to then actually utilize the full potential of your graphics card, and that's really what's going to allow you to render these things ultra fast. And I mean ultra fast. So once you have that done, you've had your file name, you click the destination of where you want to go, we click Add to Render Queue. It's going to pop up on the right-hand side of our screen where it says Render Queue, and then all we have to do is hit Render All. And then in just a matter of a few seconds or minutes, depending on how fast or slow your computer is, we'll have a completed time lapse, and then you can use it in any way you want. You can bring it back into DaVinci Resolve if you want to edit it and add it to other time lapses, or you can bring it into any other NLE that you want, whether that's Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, Avid, Quantel, you name it, you can edit in it, and the file should look absolutely beautiful. That's going to wrap it up for this chapter. In chapter 2, again, we're going to go over all of the fun stuff when it comes to deflickering, removing birds, adding stylization to your shot, and really going deep into how to create day-to-night sequences, utilizing ramping tools and other dynamic keyframes. So I hope you join me for that one. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next chapter.